In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. This is our pre-draft podcast, recording on Monday morning. We will record again on Friday after we learn the fate of the Grizzlies in the draft this year, who they may select, who they may trade for. We'll get into all of that. But Chris, first, before we get into the draft stuff, I think there's a few other notes we should make. First of all, I was out at Ja Morant's camp this weekend, his pro camp at the new Sports and Events Center by the Liberty Bowl. Big crowd for Ja Morant's camp, 600 plus kids. I think there was close to 650 kids. Big turnout of parents. Taylor Jenkins was there. Jason March, the hustle coach, was there. Mike Miller, Ja's new agent. All of Ja's family, friends. So it was definitely a big deal. And it was the first time that we had seen Ja since his exit interview, back in April. And really the first time before that, the last time we had talked to him was the game before the injury. So we have not heard from Ja all that often over these last 6 months or so. The one thing I really took away that I thought, we could argue how significant it is, but I do think that it was notable, is that Ja seemed really happy. He spoke about how important it is to him that he has his AAU team, that he's been able to coach those kids and relate to them in terms of just having an opportunity to see them grow and do all the same things he did as a kid. And also the opportunity to just be among all the young basketball players over the weekend. So for Ja to be happy, I think is news. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's meaningful. I don't know. Certainly, I think Ja has had a tendency. He is not an even keel personality, right? You think of the Tim Duncan, never too high, never too low. Ja has highs and lows, and we've seen that. And that has been related to his situation as a basketball player, to his situation, broadly. And so I do think there's more meaning in Ja's sort of demeanor, the degree that you can glean that through an interaction. I think there's more meaning for that with him than with most players. Obviously, Ja's more important than most players as well. And the other thing about the NBA is that if you're not playing, you're not talking for the most part. And so because Ja, via injury and via suspension, has not played much basketball in the last year and a half, we have not had the ability to hear from him much. So no, I think all of that stuff is both very relevant and probably revealing. And I think especially because for the Grizzlies hope start with Ja Morant. They start with a Ja Morant that's in a good place, both physically and mentally. And I think the Grizzlies' hopes have to start there. And so I think, what you can take out of him, both in terms of his physical progress coming off the injury and in terms of where his head and his mood seems to be, I do think is meaningfully positive. Yeah.
Yeah. He's been open about some of the mental challenges that accompany both expectation and his status and fame and all of those things. And I think that, you don't want to, it is, June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, we should note.
Right.
Which at this time, if you're a Grizzlies fan, you really hope that he's happy. And what struck me is that not only was he great with those kids, he was highly interactive, engaged with them. That is everything you want to see in a setting like that. But it also just shows you what a shame it is when he feels like he has to be in a shell, because he does mean a lot. He is a huge star here, the bigger star than maybe the Grizzlies have ever had, most likely.
Well,
so I think it's meaningful.
I think if you remember with the rise of Ja in that first couple years before things took a little bit of a downturn, part of the excitement around Ja Morant in terms of what he could mean to a franchise was not just how good he was and how exciting a basketball player he was. It was that on top of that, he seemed like someone who was going to lead a team, who was a good teammate, who was a galvanizing presence that players would get behind. And I think that part of his that part of his reality hasn't budged as much as the other stuff. But to be the Ja Morant that's going to lead the team, you want to see the Ja Morant that is in that good mind frame, right? I mean, that was always like one of the differences between, say, a Ja Morant. We used to have Ja Morant, Trae Young arguments, right? And one of the points was that guys love playing with Ja Morant. There's a lot of evidence that guys don't love playing with Trae Young, right? And so with Ja, it's not just about the magnitude of his talent. It is about his ability to be someone who players will gravitate to, who can sort of lead a team and people can really get behind. And so you want to see all that come all the way back to where it was.
Yeah. Well, again, we hadn't talked to him much. And when we had talked to him, it was in really challenging moments for him. And so to get the opportunity to talk and like see him be happy just was very striking. It felt like something we hadn't really felt in a long time. And, obviously I think it's a positive for all involved if he is happy. So that was, I thought, a good sign this weekend to see. And, I mean, you wish that for anyone, right?
Of course.
You just wish for people to be happy in life. And Ja's been gifted with amazing basketball skills and financial freedom as much as he could ever want, and more. And still you see people have challenges, and it just goes to show you that, life isn't always easy. So I think for him to be in a better state and be happy like that, it was something that as a human, you root for, and it was a good thing to see. Other piece you wrote this morning, I don't know if your column is up yet. It'll probably be up by the time
people are listening to this
comes up. Yeah. Why don't you tell? I haven't had the chance to read it yet. Why don't you tell everybody what your tune-up was just before the draft?
Yeah, there's no real thesis statement. It's a little bit of a grab bag. I over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've written 3 big pieces on what I think are the 3 obvious issues or questions or areas of work for the Grizzlies this offseason. One of those is the number 9 pick in the draft. One of those is the search for a center. And one of those is the question about Luke Kennard's team option and what that's going to ultimately mean to where the team lands relative to the luxury tax and all of that. Those 3 issues are all potentially interconnected with each other, but I've written about them separately. And today, just, Monday of draft week, I just circled back to all 3 and sort of, a little bit of update, a little bit of let's reconsider this stuff in the light of some of the rumors and some of the conjecture that's out there. So we can take, any of those wherever you want to go with it.
Well, what do you think is the most interesting thing as we head into Thursday? Like, what are you looking for first? Are they going to use the pick? Are they going to stay at 9? Is it the Kennard stuff? Like, when you look big picture, I mean, this is all really going to kick off in just a few days. Where does your head go first?
The point of intersection on all of this is, can they acquire their main front court addition? I mean, there may be more than one front court addition, but can they acquire their main front court addition in the draft or via trade? Does that get done basically? Now, trade stuff could happen beyond this week, but I think it's more likely that the Grizzlies, if they do a significant trade, it's going to be this week. So do they come out of this week with that box checked? If they don't, then that really is going to pressure the Kennard stuff, because if you don't acquire that player in the draft or via trade, the only other path is free agency. And the only way they can have more than like $5 million to spend in free agency is to decline Luke Kennard's option. And so that's really the intersection of that stuff. So I'm looking at, do they come out of draft night with that center box checked? Do they move up and get Klingon? Do they move down and draft Zach Edey? Do they trade out in some way that they acquire some veteran center like some of the names we've talked about? Do they check that center box on draft night or during the draft? Draft nights, plural now. Do they acquire that player during the draft or not? And if they don't, what does that mean? To me, that's sort of the main thing.
Okay. Mr. Minnesota. Now, I'm sure your weather is very nice up there during the summer. I'm positive it's not 95 degrees as it is here in Memphis. So welcome back, by the way.
Thanks.
You got greeted with extreme heat. That's just the only way that we do it here in Memphis. But I'd like to get a temperature check on a few of these draft talking points. I want to start with the very top of the draft with Atlanta, because there's been all of this. I mean, I guess there's been a little bit of smoke on like Atlanta could be interested in Clingan. We saw Vicini put Clingan number 1 last week on his mock draft. Now, ESPN has a new mock draft out today. They have Clingan all the way down at number 7, which is different. I wondered in the moment, do you think that the Atlanta Clingan stuff is real? And I say this just because I think there's interest in Clingan from a Grizzlies standpoint. Do you think the Atlanta Clingan stuff is real, or do you think that was potentially Atlanta maybe just trying to maneuver their way into these trade talks that are rumored for some of the teams that may have interest in coming up to get Clingan?
Oh, it could be some of both. It wouldn't surprise me if it's real, because this draft does not have a clear-cut number 1 player. Alexander Sarr has not worked out in Atlanta at all, apparently. And so, like, why not Clingan? Like, why should anyone believe that Zachary Ricochet is clearly a better prospect than Donovan Clingan, right? So it's like, why not Clingan at number 1? Clingan seems to have one of the highest floors of players in the draft. The Hawks may not have a long-term answer at center. Like, Clint Capella's on his way out, it seems. Onyeka Okongwu is more of a combo big, not like a true center. And then their head coach, who seems to have a lot of sway, is Quinn Snyder, who had tons of success coaching Rudy Gobert in Utah, who's one of the players most, Donovan Clingan's most connected to. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Atlanta was seriously considering Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I do think that they would probably, given the fact that this draft doesn't have a clear top tier. Maybe it's a little bit more clear now than it was when we started draft talk and draft season came around. It wouldn't be shocking if they wanted to be at least part of those talks. And I'm not saying that they were giving Vicini wrong information or anything, but I do think that if teams have interest in coming to get Clingan, why would you not?
That is the commonality sort of with the Clingan stuff, is that it's funny, the ESPN mock that you cited has Clingan going 7, but they discuss Clingan at just about every pick, starting at 1 and going down. And when they get to 7, they basically say NBA executives don't think he'll be there at 7 because they think someone's going to trade up at some point to draft him. And so if there's interest in teams to trade up for Clingan, and there's been at least 3 or 4 teams reported, the Grizzlies among them, as potentially being interested in trading up for Clingan, then it sort of makes sense that teams along the way would want to show at least some interest in that to put themselves in line for potential trade stuff. And I wonder about that with Portland. Apparently Portland's telling everybody Clingan won't get past us at 7. Well, does that mean that they really like Clingan, or is that them saying, we will take the trade value of Clingan at 7 over anything else that might be there,
That's a spot where they already have a center.
That's right. They have 3, actually.
Yeah.
Under contract next season.
And not projects, right? Like on most of those cases.
Yeah, but none of them are, what do you think about DeAndre Ayton? Robert Williams III is perpetually injured. They found a guy in the G League last year. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Duop Reith, who had a good season. So it wouldn't, you could see them saying like Clingan, we're trying to build our foundation. Clingan, Scoot Henderson, that could be our foundation. But you could also see them saying like, this is where the value is. And that's why I tend to think that, I don't know if the Grizzlies want to trade it for Clingan or not, but if they do, I think it's somewhere along the way that's going to happen. So like some team's going to take Clingan to trade him.
So you don't think we've reached the point where there's enough smoke on the Grizzlies Clingan trade that it feels real?
Oh, I think it may very well be real, but I don't know that. Right. I think when it comes to draft week, almost nothing, even by the best reporters, almost nothing is presented as truly factual. Lock this up. This is a statement of fact. Everything has a little wiggle room to it,
So if Clingan does go higher than the Grizzlies are able to reach, let's say he does go first to the Hawks.
Right.
How does that change this draft landscape? Do you think the Grizzlies would trade up for a player that's not going to fix their front court problem?
You know, it's interesting that this is something that no one is talking about at all around for the Grizzlies. The idea of trading up for someone who's not Donovan Clingan, it would not shock me.
I don't think it would surprise me either.
Well, in particular, I mean, the guys I like are Castle and Shepard, but I think it wouldn't surprise me if those are the guys the Grizzlies like, especially Shepard. Shepard is the kind of guy, you know, the way he pops on some of the metrics. I think Kevin Pelton had him number 1 prospect in the draft by stats. It wouldn't surprise me if the Grizzlies have a very high draft grade on him.
They like those types of players.
Yeah.
Clingan also fits into that mix, by the way. Highly efficient.
Yes.
Like he, in terms of like from an analytics standpoint, very.
No, he was top 2 or 3 on just the stats, pure stats projection that Pelton had.
Yeah, it is interesting to me because no one has discussed that, but you know, instantly you think, well, if Clingan's off the board, the Grizzlies are probably going to move back. I don't know. I don't know about that. Like, I think that's been discussed.
Right.
It is, and I certainly understand that logic. If the players you don't like aren't there, that they could move back. But I wouldn't rule out that they could move up and get someone else. I mean, Zach
that's the one scenario with the draft no one's talking about that would not shock me. It's the thing about that though is you would be expending extra assets to move up for a player, especially if it's Shepard, for a player who is not clearly going to be a starter for your team. You wonder if you're willing to do that. I do think, you know, trade up, trade down, stay put. The way the draft seems to be shaking out, the stay put is the least enticing to me, just because it seems like that is headed towards rolling the dice on one of a handful of perimeter players, none of whom don't seem certain, because none of these guys are certain, but B, none of whom seem to have a clear, direct path to playing time on this team. Whereas if you draft a center, whether that's Edey or Ware or Filipowski, there's a clear path to a role. If you draft Ron Holland or Cody Williams, they may not be playing next season.
You're getting ahead of me here.
Yeah.
You're getting ahead of me here. Because I do want to get to that. And I do want to ask you eventually about the possibility of trade or no trade. But the other one, I don't even know. I mean, I got to be careful because you don't even want to say rumored, but like discussed.
There's much discussion happening right
to
now.
number 3 with Houston. And part of that discussion is whether or not Marcus Smart would have to be included in some sort of deal to get to number 3. I was listening to you earlier. It's interesting because I think you have some different type of speculation out there on both sides about, I don't know if they would be willing to part with Marcus Smart, or, well, if they want to trade for a solid veteran, they almost need to part with Marcus Smart because of the salary matching piece. Where do you stand in terms of the possibility Marcus Smart could get traded?
I don't feel like I have a strong conviction based on what the conversations I've had about Marcus Smart and the Grizzlies. I certainly have no sense. You probably don't either. I assume that they're trying to move Marcus Smart. No. But I also don't have this under no circumstances will they move Marcus Smart vibe. You know, I think it's unlikely, but if the right scenario popped up, I mean, and the one that lots of people invented at the same time, myself among them, is what if Jared Allen's available in that contract match? Like, I could see scenarios where they would move Marcus Smart. I kind of have a hard time seeing the move up to Houston thing being a Marcus Smart deal. I feel like if that happens, it's going to be future first round pick or picks.
Here's the thing about that deal in particular, like trading Marcus. It's not something I would do, I don't think.
Right.
Because you would be trading for a player that played 22 minutes a game in college that's probably not going to be a 30-plus minute per game guy for you. You wouldn't think in this short competitive window that you have. Maybe if you got to the playoffs, he's logging more minutes. But like on a daily basis, I don't think he's playing that much. It is a gamble because it is a draft pick, and draft picks can be busts often. Even some of the guys that we think are going to be really good turn out to be not as good as we thought. I'm not saying that Clingan that would be the case with him or not. I'm just saying that is a possibility that you have to consider. And you'd be giving up a player, and we saw how important perimeter defense is in the playoffs this year, who has a ton of playoff experience, who they like from an intangibles standpoint, who they didn't really get to see on the court at all with Ja Morant last year. I just think that, to me, that's too pricey. That's too much for me. And I don't like giving up a player like Marcus Smart just because I don't like giving up a sure thing, a player that I think is going to play a lot of minutes for you and be a useful player. I still think he can be a useful player. If you want to argue that, maybe he's not as good as he once was, that'd be a different conversation. But I think Marcus Smart is going to be good for the Grizzlies if he plays most of next season. And it's too expensive.
See, I could see that rationale being accurate, but I could see it the other way for the Grizzlies. I could see, if you think Donovan Clingan's going to be a star center, you're getting a star center or a high-level starting center on a rookie contract. Year one of a 4-year rookie contract. Yeah, I think that's pretty valuable. I honestly almost question it more from the Houston side. I don't, to move down from 3 to 9 and get Marcus Smart when you already have Dylan Brooks and Amin Thompson and Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet. And I don't think any of those players would be in the deal for a contract match. I don't see the value there for Houston. And so I just don't. I think that is an idea that has been conjured out of air by people connecting dots. They see, the Grizzlies are interested in moving up for Clingan, we think. And Houston's interested in trading their pick, we think. And, Ime Udoka, the coach at Houston, used to coach Marcus Smart in Boston. Aha, Brian Windhorst fingers in the air. Let's connect these dots. I think the Marcus Smart to Houston, and maybe I'll be wrong, maybe it'll happen, but I think the Marcus Smart to Houston thing is literally people connecting dots that are not necessarily connected in real life.
Do you think Marcus Smart almost has to be included in a deal to get a veteran center?
No, because there are other ways to get to the same kind of salary match. You got Luke Kennard at 15, right? Who we haven't gotten into detail on yet, but Luke Kennard's at 15. You add any of these smaller contracts, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, Jake LaRavia, add any one of those to Luke Kennard, and you're sort of in the same general salary territory. So if it's strictly about salary match and the value is more draft pick, I think you can get to the salary match without including Marcus Smart. The question is, are there scenarios where Marcus Smart is part of the value match? Like in that Cleveland, again, this is not a real thing. This is a thing people are making up, which doesn't mean it wouldn't become real, but there's no sourcing on this. But I could see a scenario where the Cavs are interested in Marcus Smart because he would help shore up the defense alongside Donovan Mitchell. And so maybe they want that in addition to whatever draft pick you get. Another one that I think people have just made up, but also makes some sense is like this idea of Marcus Smart for Brook Lopez. Well, I can see Milwaukee wanting Marcus Smart, right? Because they need a better defense around Damian Lillard. But I think if you're just trying to match salary, you can match salary other ways.
Do you think Marcus Smart will be how do you project what he could be on the rest of this contract that he has with the Grizzlies? He was injured. He didn't shoot the ball as well as he did before he got to Memphis. I haven't lost it. I'm not hitting the panic button on that. I still think he would be a useful player for Memphis, but I think it's an interesting question.
No, it's an interesting question, and it's very unclear. And as with so many things with the Grizzlies, it's been so long ago since we've had good evidence, and the evidence is sort of scant. It feels like way, way back in the past. The advanced numbers, if you look at this number estimated plus minus, it is Marcus Smart rated as like a top 5 defender of the NBA last season. Well, that sounds good. It's also based on 20 games, whatever. And not only is it a 20-game sample, it's really a 20-game sample that's 2 different 10-game samples. Because there's one sample where he was basically playing starting point guard in a starting lineup that included Zaire Williams. And guess what? That didn't work. But then there's another 10-game sample where he's playing on the wing with Desmond Bane, or not, maybe it's 7 games or whatever. But basically there's half a sample of him playing on the ball with a non-scorer in Zaire Williams and a non-scorer at center, whether that was Tillman or Bismack Biyombo. That categorically did not work. It was a dumpster fire of offense. But then you have this other sample where they moved him to the wing and he's playing with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, and that was pretty good, And so I think the idea of Marcus Smart that they envisioned when they traded for him is still, nothing has changed in terms of that still being an attractive idea, with the exception Two exceptions. One, he's another year older, so who knows? But then B, like Vince Williams now can do the same thing. And maybe you don't believe, he hasn't done it in the playoffs. He's not the same kind of locker room presence. But if you believe in what he did last season, during the regular season, he may be a better version of the same thing, you know?
It's pretty easy to believe that based on what he did. I think this is an obvious preferred scenario for the Grizzlies would be Klingon or Shepard or whoever it may be that's at the top of their list slips to 6 or 7, and you can do what I've been calling the budget trade to move up, which is giving up future draft assets, not having to give up a veteran.
This is why I keep circling Detroit at 5. If the guy you like, everyone assumes it's Klingon, but to your point, maybe it's not. Maybe it's somebody else. If the guy or a guy you like is there at 5, or 6, but particularly at 5, is that a deal you can make? Future first-round pick, jump up 4 spots. Is that a deal that could be made?
Well, that would be the highest I think they could potentially climb by only attaching a future.
To me, that's the starting point for that kind of trade. You're right.
I think ideally you get
5, 6, 7.
6.
5, 6, 7.
Yeah,
that range.
6 and 7. 6 is Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
That is the ideal scenario, I think, if it could play out for the Grizzlies. And I'm not as worried about giving up future draft assets when you know you're trying to win right now as I would be maybe a little bit more hesitant to give up a veteran, experienced locker room guy, defender like Marcus Smart, who I think could be a valuable piece for you in the playoffs. And by the way, has performed better in the playoffs than he has in the regular season over the course of his entire career. So that to me, that would be, do you view it as that as well? That would be the ideal scenario for the Grizzlies. And you fix your front court problem now.
Yeah, but to me, if the trade up is not for Klingon in that scenario, that in some ways maybe suggests maybe a separate Marcus Smart trade. Because what if you're moving up for Castle?
Could.
If you're moving up for Castle or Shepard to go with John Morant and Desmond Bane and Vince Williams, now you got a lot of duplication. This is also why I wonder about the mock drafts that have Devin Carter going at 9 to the Grizzlies.
Okay.
Because you already have Marcus Smart and Vince Williams. You're adding Devin Carter to that. It's like the same 3 players almost.
Oh, well, I was going to jump in here and I was going to ask you, if they were to stay at 9, first of all, what do we think the likelihood of that is, that they are picking at number 9?
Well, it takes more effort to not pick at 9 than to pick at 9 because that's where their pick is.
Yeah, but I think it's still more likely that they don't pick at 9.
I'm gonna say no. I just think it's. I think they're looking to move one direction or another, but it's so much harder. I'm gonna put it 55%. They stay at 9. I'll put it just over the line.
See, when I was asked this earlier this week, I put it at 51% that I think that they move out of it.
So we're right around the line, but we're on different sides of it.
But we're on different sides of it. Well, if they do pick at 9, I mean, some of the options that could be there, a lot of them are wings. I mean, you see Cody Williams thrown around a little bit on the mock drafts. You've seen
who I don't think either of us are excited about.
Devin Carter. Who excites you more? Who would you rather pick if you had Devin Carter or Cody Williams?
So Devin Carter is the kind of player I like. He is the DeAnthony Melton model, right? The Vince Williams Jr. model. The dude who rebounds above his size, who defends like crazy, who goes hard. I love those kind of players. My problem is that you already got 2 of the same guy in Marcus Smart and Vince Williams. I just think it's overkill to do 3. And then on top of that, I don't know if I believe in the shooting. He shot the ball really well last season, but he didn't shoot the ball as well before that in college. And the form is kind of funky. I don't know if I'm sold that he's a real shooter at the NBA level. Cody Williams to me is just a ball of clay. Like, I don't know. I can't see the future.
So the problem with Cody Williams to me is that he is a ball of totally because it could take him 3-4 years before he's a useful NBA player.
He could be great. He could never be anything. Period. I had no idea. None.
I don't either, and you don't have time to wait.
Right. This is why I'm not excited about that. This is why, like, I would rather see them move down and take, Edie or Ware or Filipowski and get something else if they could, because I think those guys will step in and play.
Yeah. I do too. Do you want to call your shot? Do you want to try to predict what will happen? I'll leave it up to you. You don't have to.
I think, even though I just said 55% chance, I think they will they'll make some kind of trade during draft week. I I think Zaire Williams, they may make more than one trade, but I think Zaire Williams will be traded during draft week.
Okay. I can see that.
To free up a roster spot, to free up money if possible. Because I think they want to add more than one front court player. And even if that second one is just a free agent signing, they need a roster space for it.
Yeah.
I'll make another prediction.
Okay.
Luke Kennard, and these are not ironclad. This is not reporting. These are predictions.
These are predictions, right?
Luke Kennard. I wrote the column late last week on Luke Kennard. I wrote about the 5 different paths it could take. One of those paths is Luke Kennard is back with the Memphis Grizzlies next season on his current contract, 1 year, $14.7 million. That is a road that will not be taken. That's my prediction. Maybe they'll decline him and he'll just be gone. Maybe they'll agree to a new contract with him. Maybe they'll trade him this week. I do not think he will be back with the Memphis Grizzlies for $14.7 million next season.
It is a high price to pay.
Yes. And I think if it comes to that, they will decide that they would rather have access to the full mid-level exception, $12.9 million, which they can only get by declining Kennard. I think if they can't come up with a new contract with Kennard they can agree to, and they don't find a trade for Kennard this week, and they're faced with the choice, we can pay him $14.7, or we can let him go and have this full mid-level and be able to do something with that. I think they'll choose that. I do not think he'll be back for $14.7 million.
I like those predictions.
You got any predictions?
Well, I was going to say...
trade up for Klingon?
Yeah, because I've been on that train for so long, and it would be really validating, I think,
right.
if they were to do that, because I've been on the Klingon thing since, December, and I would really love it if they did that, because I think he's going to be a good player, and he's been my number one guy, and so... I'm not confident in it, but I'll go ahead and predict that
there is more pre-draft conversation about that one specific thing, the Memphis Grizzlies trying to trade up for Donovan Clingan,
than anything.
Than there's ever been that I can remember about some Grizzlies thing.
Oh, I was going to say of anything else in the draft. I feel
no, you're right. That's one of the top things people are talking about relative to the draft. It's also in this era of the Grizzlies, the thing that's been talked about most ahead of, which doesn't mean it'll happen, but I can't remember a similar scenario where so many people around the league were saying, well, the Grizzlies are trying to do this.
I think that this is a kind of a cop-out prediction, but I think that they would like to fix their front court problem in the draft, and they're not going to come out of this empty-handed without at least one front court member. I mean, I think that's a pretty safe prediction.
I think... I don't necessarily think that they have to have some splashy center that they get via trade or draft. But if they don't, guess what? Even if you let Luke Kennard walk and you have the full mid-level, you're not signing Nick Claxton with the full mid-level. You're not signing Isaiah Hartenstein with the full mid-level. If you get to that point in the process, that's what you're like, okay, are we signing Andre Drummond? Or are we signing Jalen Smith?
They could get to that point.
Are we
in
signing
the
Gogo Badatse? Are we bringing back Jonas Valanciunas? That is what that gets to.
They could just sign Andre Drummond and clap their hands for $5 million and be done.
This is the least exciting Grizzlies scenario that might happen is the draft falls in a way that they're picking among these wings at 9. They don't find a trade. They draft Cody Williams, the ball of clay at 9. They decline Luke Kennard's option. They sign Andre Drummond in free agency, and they say, we're done here. And guess what? They're under the luxury tax. That could happen, and that will not be exciting to people.
Well, now that you brought that up, I guess we could talk, where do you think – do you have any sense if they're willing to cross that first apron? Or if they want to try to get underneath it?
My quasi-informed belief is that they have not predetermined where they're going to be relative to the luxury tax. Which, by that I mean, they may end up under the tax. I don't think they are committed as an organization to be under the tax. I think they're willing to go into the tax. I don't know whether they're willing to cross the first apron, but to me, if you're willing to be in the tax, why wouldn't you be willing to cross? I think, it just follows to me that if you're willing to pay the tax at all, you should be willing to go to the first apron.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
And as far past the first apron as you can. I mean, that would be if you're going to go over it, but.
And so we'll see about that stuff.
Well, it's going to be an interesting week for sure. Chris and I will be back with you again at the end of this week and setting up for Summer League, talking about who the Grizzlies drafted. We might have player introductions that day, depending on what they do in the draft. You never know. So it should be a fun week in Memphis. We have waited so long for this, Chris, and we're finally here. It was a long
season.
6 weeks. And a long 6 weeks for you, moving.
It's been a long 6 weeks, but it's been a long time since there's been, since the trade deadline, It's been a long time since there's been all that meaningful stuff for the Grizzlies. So I'm just excited. Oh, here's what I was going to say. I was going to say something, and then you asked me the question I forgot. Here's where, now that I've presented this downer scenario of they draft Cody Williams, they sign Andre Drummond, and they let Luke Kennard walk, and they dodge the tax, woo-hoo-hoo. This is where I put on the optimist hat, and I say, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I think that'd be a bad outcome. I hope that's not what happens. But as much focus as we have right now on the way they might change their team, the Grizzlies' ultimate success next season is going to be about the players already here. It is going to be about John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, probably Marcus Smart, Brandon Clark. That's 7 guys. They're already here. I think it's important to try to bolster that group. But the success next season will be driven more by the guys already here than whatever guys show up in the next week.
You love this stuff.
I do. I love the
off-season stuff. I can hear it in your voice. When
I'm a sicko, man. I instead of counting sheep, I envision trade up Stephon Castle scenarios to get myself to sleep at night.
I mean, yeah. Listen, I'm looking forward to basketball in Las Vegas coming up. We've been talking about the draft for forever. So I'm ready for it to actually happen, see what comes of it. But again, Chris and I will be back later this week. Go read his stuff over at the Daily Memphian. Go read about Ja. I was out at his camp this weekend. And go take a listen to the other Daily Memphian podcasts while you're at it too. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.